Everyone, Dr. Josh Matson here with Infinity Chiropractic Center. I'm going to talk about pigeon-toed and then toe-out walking. So a lot of kids come in and they'll be walking with their toes. I don't know if you can see it, but their toes will be pointed in. Can't really get a good picture of my legs, but their toes will be pointed in like this when they walk, right? There's other kids that will come in, their toes will be pointed out like this when they walk, and it'll be really a large deviation. What you should see is that they should be pretty straight, maybe slightly out a little bit is normal. What it means though is when kids are toe in, that means they don't have good, typically they don't have good muscle tone. There can be other stuff, like there can be hip issues, there can be misalignments in the sacrum and misalignments in the low back that can create that distortion of their toes coming in. But what most commonly developmentally will cause it is one of two different primitive reflexes, typically a symmetrical tonic neck reflex or an asymmetrical tonic neck reflex. Those two reflexes will create muscular imbalances that will create more muscle tone in their flexor muscles. So they'll bring their whole body forward, their thighs, let me go down just a little bit. Their thighs, they'll have more muscle tone here, so they'll pull their knees in, which will pull their toes in as well. So if you have an asymmetrical tonic neck reflex or symmetrical tonic neck reflex, you'll start seeing those imbalances in their flexor muscles versus their extensor muscles. You'll also see them be pulled farther forward like this, especially in their shoulders, and they'll typically have worse posture, especially with the symmetrical tonic neck reflex. And again, that further will create that distortion. Another thing that creates it is when kids don't develop movement appropriately, they don't develop the frontal areas of their brain effectively. Your frontal areas are responsible for shutting down muscle tone and helping regulate muscle tone in your body. And when it's not functioning well, you'll see higher flexor muscle tone. And what that means and what that looks like is kids with poor posture, kids where their knees drop in, their flexors, again, where their toes start to point in, they have higher muscle tone in their flexors, and then we start to pull forward like this. Another good example is like when you see elderly people, as their frontal lobe starts to degenerate and function less and less well, you'll see them start coming more forward and more forward and more forward and more forward. So you'll see the same things that you see in a lot of kids with neurodevelopmental disorders with people that have neurodegenerative disorders as well. So, but that's because their frontal lobe isn't functioning well enough to shut those flexor muscles down. And that's also a reason why, like when infants are born, why they're so curled up like this, curled up into a ball, is because their frontal lobe isn't functioning well enough to shut down that muscle tone. But that all starts with developing primitive reflexes, because that helps you to develop your frontal lobes. So that's pigeon-toed. So if you have a kid that has pigeon-toed, biggest things you can do, recap, get rid of their primitive reflexes. That will help them out most. Get them adjusted. That helps out a ton. And then work on strengthening exercises for their glutes, for their feet, for their lower legs. That will help them to build that muscle tone back up after you get rid of those reflexes. If they walk toe out, a lot of times kids will walk toe out and they'll have a really wide stance gait. So their legs are wider, and that's usually because they're not stable. They're unstable. So one or two things will cause that. Their cerebellum isn't functioning well, which sits back here. Helps you coordinate everything, helps you coordinate good muscle tone, helps you coordinate an area of your brain called your vestibular system. That's number two. Your vestibular system may not be functioning well, so you don't have good balance or coordination. That's typically what you'll do is you'll widen your base, and then you'll bring your feet out a little bit, or you'll point your toes out and widen your base so that you get more stability. Again, a lot of times those kids have primitive reflexes. Or they just never develop their vestibular system well, or their cerebellum isn't able to coordinate it. But in both the cases, what you get is large imbalances of your muscle tone in the front versus your muscle tone in the back. If you're pigeon-toed, you have higher muscle tone in the front. If you're toe out or duck walking, you have higher extensor muscle tone. So that balance is always important. Just like anything in life, symmetry is super important. So if you have anyone that's struggling with this, anyone that's struggling, message me. I'll see if I can help you there, or get them in the office and we'll get them checked out. Have an awesome day, guys. Enjoy.